It'll tell you where it is afterwards.
Okay.
All right, welcome. Good morning. Today we're going to be discussing bike buses and walking school buses. I am Sarah Whiteway with Creating Healthy Schools and Communities. We also have Kate Huber from Creating Healthy Schools and Communities with us this morning as well. All right, so first up, what is a bike bus? So it is one of the many encouragement strategies for safe routes to schools. But basically all it is a group of students that are riding their bikes together along a predetermined route with an adult or a couple of adults leading them to school. And because it does require students to ride bikes, it's best for older elementary and middle school age students. You might have some kindergarteners who are great bike riders and they could join you, but I wouldn't suggest trying to like launch a program with pre-K and kindergarten students. They're just not strong enough bike riders usually yet. And then what is a walking school bus? And that is very similar, another encouragement strategy for safe routes to school, but it is instead of students riding bikes to school, they're walking to school, again, along a predetermined route with adult supervision. And so you can start this with even the youngest elementary age students, but it can work right up to middle school. High schoolers probably don't want to be led to school by adults. They can probably make it on their own, but getting a group of them together might still be really helpful for them because they are very social creatures often. All right, so I did another webinar earlier in the year on overall safe routes to school. And so if you want to see some of the background about all of the engagement strategies for safe routes to school, as well as what they call the 6 E's, the engineering, equity, education, encouragement, and evaluation, and what you can do for all of those, you can check out that webinar because I will send you these slides after and you can see that webinar too. So I'm not going to go through all of those. I'm really just going to be talking about the bike bus and the walking school bus today. But why is it important to be encouraging walking and biking to school? So 55 years ago, about almost 50% of students got to school by their own power, either walking or biking. And only 20% were driven to school. The other 40% about took the bus. So now we're up down to 10% of students who are walking and biking. And that number was from 2009, but it hasn't changed, or maybe it's gone down a little bit since then. So that's a pretty drastic change in the last 50-ish years. And that causes a few problems. So if you can create a bike bus or a walking school bus, what does that do? So first off, for some families, it really shows them active transportation is possible. Maybe it didn't feel safe if they were doing it on their own, or they just didn't even consider the possibility. So this is one way to show people, hey, this is a fun, easy way to get to school. It does increase safety. So the more students you have walking and biking, sometimes it can involve closing streets off, having an increased police presence, and having those adult volunteers supervising increases safety. It's fun. Students like it. And I'm going to quickly go through all of the reasons why it's great to have your students doing this for your school, for your community, for their education. So we want to reduce the number of students that are hit by cars. And walking school buses and bike buses are one of the ways for students who are already walking to or biking to school. It decreases the number of kids who are hit by cars, which obviously we want no kids to ever be hit by cars on their way to school. So decreasing that number is super important. It contributes to a healthy lifestyle. We know that we need our youngest generation to learn healthy lifestyles so that they have long, healthy lives and don't have any health problems as they get older. So this is one of the ways of contributing to a healthy lifestyle. It fosters independence. So it teaches kids that they can get around their communities on their own, that they don't need to rely on parents driving them everywhere. it prepares students for learning. So if your students have walked or biked to school, they get to school having gotten some fresh air, some exercise. Their brains are more ready to learn than if they've sat in a school bus for half an hour before walking into the school. And then all of the reasons that help the community. So we want to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. We want to build that community. So especially because adults are involved in this, it gets people talking, it gets adults talking to each other, getting to know their neighbors, getting to know the other parents at the school as they wait for those doors to open. It reduces congestion. So most of the schools around here at least were not designed for this many personal vehicles to be dropping students off and picking them up every day. And it just leads to traffic problems. And so the fewer personal vehicles we can get dropping students off at school and picking them up at the end of the day, the less traffic we'll have. And then finally, it saves money either for the individual if they're just not using gas to transport students to school, or maybe the district realizes that if they get enough kids walking on a bike bus or on a walking school bus, they can actually decrease the amount of buses that they need to send out. So now into the how do you actually organize things to have a walking school bus or a bike bus? And so I'm going to go through right now my pre-planning tips. So these are the things you would do before you start advertising, telling people that there's a bike bus program. So a few things to do to make sure that you're kind of ready for it. And the first one of those is a walkability assessment, also called a walk audit. And I've got a link here that takes you to a page that tells you all about it. But you're basically walking around the neighborhood around the school that students would be walking or biking and checking to make sure that it is safe. You don't want to be starting to encourage more people to walk and bike to school if, for example, they'd have to walk along a highway and there's no sidewalk. So you want to check and make sure that it's safe. You want to know if there are places where you need to get a crossing guard or repaint a crosswalk. So doing this walking audit or the walkability assessment before starting these programs is really important. It's also important to teach students how to bike and walk safely to school. So you can do that either have like a program where you're specifically teaching a bunch of pedestrian and bike safety to the group of students who are going to want to start walking and biking to school, or it can be, and even better is it's school wide. It's part of your health class, or it is on your morning announcements that you're teaching them walking and biking tips, because that's going to be useful for them outside of getting to school and getting home from school as well. And then you want to make sure if you're going to be launching some sort of bike bus program that you've got enough bike storage, bike racks at the school so that you don't on that first day have a ton of bikes and no one has anywhere to put them. And I will say that while these are all like, do this before you launch your bike bus or your walking school bus program, if you do these and then it ends up that you are not able to do a bike bus or a walking school bus, these are still great things to have done for your school and for your students anyways. For those students who are walking and biking to school on their own, this is super helpful to have done that walk audit. It's obviously good for students to have learned how to walk and bike safely. And bike storage is only going to encourage more people to bring their bikes to school. So don't feel like if you get this far and then you're not able to do the next step, that was a waste. This was still useful. All right, and then this is, I think, the hardest part is finding adult volunteers. So both the bike bus and the walking school bus require that there's some sort of supervision of students as they get to school. That's kind of the point of it. So you've got to recruit some volunteers. And the most obvious people are staff at the school who are interested, parents of these students, elderly community members, maybe retired people who like to walk. And then there's been success in some walking school bus and bike bus programs building community partnerships. So maybe with already established walking groups that want to help you out by walking students to school. Bike advocacy groups would be a great place to help you with a bike bus program. Sometimes libraries are, kind of the hub of the community, and they're super interested in doing everything they can to help schools and to help students. I read about one where lots of students from a particular school were going to the library, we're all walking to the library after school together already, because that was just they had an after school program. And the library realized that they could just send someone who worked at the library or a library volunteer to pick up that group of students because they had to cross a busy road. So I'm going to talk about a few examples of programs that are led by some of these different people. So the first one is the Alameda Bike Bus, and that was started by a PE teacher in Portland. That's where I'm not sure if I'm saying Alameda or Alameda properly, but this is kind of the biggest, most long-lasting bike bus program. And what it is this PE teacher started it, and every Wednesday morning, they close off a couple of roads leading to the school, and huge numbers of students all like kind of join up on that closed road and all ride to school together. So it leads to, adorable pictures like this. Students are super excited about it because they get to ride with all their friends. You can hear them like they're cheering, like, when I say bike, you say bus, bike, bus, bike, bus. And it's been going on for quite a while. So that was a PE teacher, and he started it at one school, really because he wanted to help build community at that school. And after, I think, moving to another job at another school when it was during COVID, he started it because there was a real lack of bus drivers there. And they were closing bus routes. So this was a way of getting students to school safely and showing them that they could ride their bikes to school. So while this was every Wednesday morning, they all bike as a group, it has increased the number of students that bike to school on all other days as well. My next one is maybe a better example for people or for schools that are located in a more rural area. So this is Natomas Park, and they have a walking school bus. And it's also Wednesday morning, but it's an adult supervised group of students who are dropped off at one specific location. I think they said 3 or 4 blocks to the school, and then they all walk to school together. So they have some parent volunteers that wear orange aprons and vests. Everyone's dropped off in a Kohl's parking lot at a specific time, and they all walk to school together. So that's another way of doing it, especially if your school district isn't laid out in a great way for to have a lot of different routes. You could have one drop-off location. So that still, does a lot of the things that you want to get out of a walking school bus, right? It helps build community. Those kids are getting to school after doing a little bit of physical activity. And I will say, I walk a group of kids to an elementary school, like my own kids and the other kids from our bus stop on Tuesday mornings. And you might think like a 3 to 4 block walk, that's not going to get them that much exercise. But it does, because they do not just like walk in a straight line like I do. They stop and then they race to the next tree, and then they come back, and then they stop and pick flowers, and then they have to run to catch up. So they really do get a little bit of exercise and spend a bunch of time just, playing on the walk to school. And then this one is the US Bus in Arlington, Virginia. And there was already an Arlington, Virginia walking group made up of retired people in the community who got together and walked regularly. And this school started a pilot program where they teamed up with this walking group to have those people as the bus drivers. And there's a link in here so you can read about it. It is adorable. You've got, elderly people joining up with kids. They're chatting. they're making those community connections that are sometimes lacking when, why else would retired community members and elementary school students, when else would they spend much time getting to know one another? And they walk the students to school, and they get that connection that they need to the community as the volunteers, and the students get to school safely. So, win-win if you can connect people who are already walkers and would love to walk a group of adorable elementary students to school, with those elementary school students who would otherwise maybe be walking on their own, be dropped off at school. So those are just a few examples of ways that you can make this work in different communities based on kind of what your needs are and what the opportunities are. All right, so if you've now found some volunteers who want to do this, how do you go about organizing your routes, organizing the buses, whether they're bike buses or walking buses? So I would suggest figuring out where there are people who would like to participate. So you're going to need to create your routes based on asking families, so sending out some sort of survey. Who would be interested in doing this? What days would you be interested in doing it? Take that data when you did your walk audit or your walkability assessment, take that data to look at where are any safety concerns, so you can kind of avoid those, and where are those safest routes. And then based on your volunteer availability, can you only do it once a month because that's when you've got enough volunteers, or is it something you can do weekly? Is it something you could do daily? Like if there are these retired walk group people, do they want to do it every day? Because maybe they do, and that could be amazing. Once you've figured out what those routes are going to be, you could start advertising it. So I would suggest start small, start with, one or two routes with one or two volunteers on each one day a week, maybe, see how it goes before trying to grow a program. This is kind of one of those programs that works really well, like as a grassroots thing, right? It can be as simple as a few parents getting together from one neighborhood and walking all those kids that live in that small area to school. But once you start growing it, then you're reaching obviously a much wider audience, which is great. You're getting more kids involved in doing it. But it does take a little bit more coordination. There's more things you have to think about once it grows from like a few parents getting together and doing this, because you've got to think about, so how are parents going to let you know if their student is not going to school that day, so that you're not, waiting for them or accidentally leaving without somebody that was just running a few minutes late. So like things like that, you're going to have to think through if you want to grow the program and start advertising it as something like that the school district offers. And then finally, are you going to incentivize it in some way? So I thought these were really cute, the little picture that's here, where when students walked or rode to school, each time as part of this walk to school days that they had, they get a card and they get hole punches. And I'm guessing when they get to the end of that, they get some sort of prize or their name on an award or, something. So are you going to do something like that to try to encourage more students to participate? All right, and then I think this is really important. If you are starting to grow the program, make sure that whatever you're doing is inclusive for students of all abilities. So obviously, this takes a little more thinking sometimes, but the two most basic things I would say you should always do is include the word role in advertising, just so people aren't feeling like, well, I don't walk, so I can't participate in the walking school bus. It can be a walk and roll bus. And then if you have students with mobility aids, check in to see what they would need to participate. Does it just take them an extra 5 minutes? Are they slightly slower? And so you can accommodate that. And my little learn more down at the bottom there's a webinar coming up from Safe Routes to School Foundation, all about including students with different abilities in Safe Routes to School. So, and that's coming up, I think it's May 15th. So if you do want to learn more about that, I will be sending out the slides. You can click on that link and join that webinar to learn, more tips than just these two basic ones that I've included. And then that's kind of it. You can start having students join your walking school bus or your bike bus. I will say it's fun. Like I walk my little group's bus stop to school Tuesday mornings, and it is really fun. Like as an adult, it's nice to go for a walk on a nice day, and they have fun doing it. I'd really encourage it if it's something that you think sounds fun. I'd encourage you to give it a try because it is really nice to do, and I think it is an important thing to do to make it possible for more students to walk and bike to school. All right, so we've had a couple of other Creating Healthy Schools and Communities has a webinar all on safe routes to schools. So if you want to learn kind of more about not just walking school buses and bike buses, but all sorts of things that you can do to encourage walking and biking to school, you can check out that webinar. And then at our wellness conference in March, Go Bike presented about walk and bike to school events and how you can host those. So we've got slides from them. So I would suggest checking out those two links. I've got some resources from other people about, all of the things to think about starting a walking school bus, especially all of those like safety things. What do you really have to teach students about walking safety? There's links to all of that from Safe Routes to School. Bike Bus World, that's the website that was started by the PE teacher in Alameda. And, he's been doing this for, it's more than 10 years now, I think. So he has lots of advice about how to make a bike bus work. And then a couple of Safe Routes to School partnership and the New York State Safe Routes to School curriculum, if you want to check those out. Does anyone have any